Thanks for having me back. Lisa, Judy, I think, told me that you said that this was the 11th year we've done this, wherever you are, since I guess since you first came to the chamber. And so we've been doing this after each legislative session for 11 years. I couldn't hardly believe that. But I was thinking back when how the job in Austin, just kind of some inside stuff here, has changed so much since I first took office. I used to budget or schedule, a day and a half a week when we weren't in session. And that might be, coming to do something like this, or it might be Brent Baker getting on me about something we did wrong for Weatherford College, or reading some briefs, that we had to do, or it might be running down to Austin for a quick committee hearing or something like that we do in the interim. Now, everything has changed so much. I mean, Texas is, the 10th largest economy in the world, and frankly, it's the best place to live in the world today. I mean, if you want a job, unemployment's like 3.5%, or in San Antonio is like 2.4 or 5 right now. If you want a job, you can get it. If you want an education, you can get it. If you need health care, you can get it. There's just no better place to raise a family. And there's so much going on commerce-wise. We're still we've been for 15 years now the leading exporter of any state. We're now we're really the new Silicon Valley. It's not just energy that we export, and it's not just ag products and other manufacturing issues. We export more tech now than Silicon Valley, than all of California. So we are the new Silicon Valley for the country. So there's just so much going on. So now it's really become, serving in the legislature, it's really become just a de facto full-time job. So now where I used to budget a day and a half a week when we weren't in session, now budget 3 or 4. And it's just really changed. But it's changed because the nature of Texas has just changed so fast. And it's the internet and the virtual world that we live in. Everybody in here, their business is so much faster than it used to be. And it isn't fax machines and postcards anymore. It's everything that's going on our iPhone. So this session was probably, we meet every other year for a full regular session. And we just finished the 1st of June. And then we often go back for special sessions. I'm hoping we aren't going to have to do one for a while. But then we have a lot of interim hearings, like my redistricting committee. We'll have 35 that I know of hearings around the state over the next 14 months starting in September. So there's a lot of things going on. But I wanted to tell you that this session was probably the best session that I've ever got to be a part of in terms of what we got done. And we really tried to make it every session has a theme, kind of a focus. And this time we really tried to make the focus be public school, public education finance, and property taxes. And so kind of wanted to just walk through those. There was a lot of other things we did and a lot of things to walk through on social issues and in budget and other stuff. But I really just want to talk about property tax and schools if I could, and then maybe have some time left over for questions. Do y'all mind if I look at some notes real quick? That'd be okay? Just so get the iPhone here. I'll embarrass myself. I have to put my glasses on maybe in a minute. But so on the property tax deal, and we all complain about our property taxes, and I do too, and I've got feeling appraisal right now. But let me tell you, you step outside of Parker County, or I represent Wise County too, outside of Wise County, and you go to some of the other counties and states, we don't have any idea what bad property taxes are. For example, a young man that used to work for me at the Capitol, he's got a 2,200 square foot house in Austin. His property taxes work out to $2,000 a month on a 2,200 square foot house. So and his are going up, 8% year after year after year after year, which means it's going to double every, 6 years or something like that at that rate. So it was a very, very serious problem. We have our frustrations here, and to be sweet and kind to your local elected officials, they try to do the best job they can with that. If anybody's ever volunteered to do any work at the appraisal board, you're crazy. Don't ever do it again. And if they try to get you to, tell them no, because it's a thankless job and it's a difficult job. But just to kind of set the backdrop, first off, the state doesn't have a property tax. We've raised most of our money, almost all of it, off consumption tax, sales tax, and we have the franchise tax as the worst, most evil tax in the world. And then we have severance tax, which is oil and gas, raises a lot for the state. But primarily it's sales tax here. We don't have a property tax. all property taxes are local. We don't hire the people or control the appraisal district. All that is done at the local level. So the question is, so how can we affect property taxes? We don't set the budgets for cities or counties or ESDs or hospital districts or the college district or anything like that. So the question was, how can we affect property tax? Well, the number one way we can is on the school tax. And for most of us, your school property tax, your schools have the largest budgets in the district. They have a lot of things on their plate, and your tax is probably 60% maybe of your property tax bill is schools. And how we affect that is the state shares funding of education with public schools. And what's happened in recent years, for a number of reasons, is the state share of that has really slowly been declining. And that means that the local districts, Susan, have had to raise more at the local level through property taxes. And then add to that we're in this incredibly fast growth area where you're almost having to build a new school in some areas every year. And so that's added a lot of burden. So what we tried to do is we tried to flip that around. And so we took some really huge steps that we're a little bit nervous about funding going forward. But I completely lost my notes here. I'm sorry. Did I actually just delete that? Oh, man, the world is about to come to an end. I accidentally hit. All right, we're going to do this off memory, folks. Who needs this thing anyway, right? So, okay, I'm glad I got a backup copy of that somewhere. By the way, I apologize. I see some of you out there I know have heard part of this before because I've been trying to hit every civic club, every chamber after the session, and so we're hitting Lions and Rotary and everybody else. So if you've heard this again, forgive me, and please leave if you want to. So, but we put about $11 billion, actually $11.2 billion of, yeah. Oh, thanks. Of new money. By the way, there's some handouts on your table. Thanks, Kevin, that you can look at to kind of walk through some of this. But we put about $11.2 billion of new money into public education. And $5 billion of that was directly for a property tax buy-down. And how that broke down was Robin Hood recapture. It's off an old court case that goes back into the 80s where a lot of the fast growth and property-rich school districts have to write checks to other school districts. For example, Weatherford ISD would write a check last year for $1.3 million to other school districts. So we bought down that recapture, which Alito pays as well. Susan, how much does Alito pay a year? 1.8 million a year that Alito's had to write a check for. We bought down property tax recapture 47% statewide, which is a huge, huge buy down. We also did a tax compression. And so over the next few years, you'll see phased in. So if you're in Weatherford or Alito ISD, and frankly, most of the school districts in the county, there's two parts to your school property tax. There's the bond side that they build buildings with, and that you vote on, and that's state doesn't have anything to do with. The other side is the M&O, maintenance and operations, and your tax rate, at least in a Weatherford and Alito, is $1.17 per $100 valuation. That will be bought down over the next 2 to 3 years if you live in Weatherford or Alito. In fact, if you live in anywhere that's got $1.17, it'll be bought down to $1.01 over the next few years, which is a nice break. The more important thing that we did on the property tax side for public schools is that we really flipped around the school finance system. And so right now we've put a 2.5% cap on how much a local school district can increase its tax revenue over its previous year's revenue. So in other words, we put a 2.5% cap that they cannot go above their previous year's tax revenue. And you might say for like an Alito, well, how are they possibly going to keep up with the growth they have? How are they possibly going to manage the influx of people? Well, new growth doesn't count against their property tax. So the new growth that comes in doesn't count against that 2.5%. But more importantly, and here's the really great deal for property tax owners, what the state did was the state flipped around the school finance system, and we said if For example, Aledo really needs 5% next year. Anything between 2.5% that they're capped at and 10%, the state will pick up that delta going forward. And so what that should mean in years going in the out years is you'll begin to see your local school property taxes, which again are about 60% of your property tax. You'll begin to see those, instead of going like this, you'll begin to see those hold steady, and you'll begin to see the state's share of that ramping up pretty radically. And so we've just shifted that from where it has been. The states were staying pretty steady. We're actually decreasing it sometimes, and the locals going up. We hope what we've done is turn that around. The state share will be going up, and the local school property tax will be holding pretty steady. So that's really the huge change, particularly for districts like in East Parker County, where you've got so much growth, and those schools are just going to incur a lot of new costs going forward every year. For the other taxing entities, we again, we don't set budgets for cities or counties. We don't set their tax rates or anything like that. What we did come in and do this time, though, is we did put a cap on how fast other taxing entities could grow as well. And so for your cities, your counties, your ESDs, they'll have a 3.5% cap. In other words, their tax revenues cannot increase next year more than 3.5% above what they were this year, which is pretty close to keeping up with inflation. Again, new construction doesn't count against that, so they get to absorb the new growth, and there's some other exceptions in there as well. But the hope is that that'll kind of slow that growth down a little bit too. That'll be hard for some districts. Again, that hasn't been such a problem in Parker County. Now, the appraisal side, the state, again, we don't do the appraisals. That's done at the local level. What the state requires is that, and what state law says is that properties be taxed at their full value. And then through the state comptroller's office, they have several different valuation models that the local appraisal district can use to do that. I don't care how you look at it, no matter how hard Larry and his group try, it is a very, very subjective process, and it makes it even harder in places like this. And in Aledo, when you put a house on the market and 2 days later they offer you more than you put it out there for, which drives those valuations up a lot too. But so we don't have a cap on that. We don't have a minimum or maximum. The state just requires that it be at full value. The reason we even say that is because we would have some school districts that would not be quite as honest as maybe our school districts would be. So since the share of state and local property taxes, since we share those, if we didn't have some standard out there, then you would have some districts say, hey guys, let's all get together and let's value our property really low so the state share will increase. Well, all that would mean is Parker County taxpayers were sending more money to the state, which we were sending to other school districts. And so that's why we have the valuation model. It's a very difficult thing. There's no easy way to deal with it. I've got my house up for appeal this time too. Probably a lot of you. How many people have appealed theirs? Okay. So a couple people have, which is interesting too. So another thing we did, we thought, okay, we don't set local budgets, and we don't want to set local budgets. We don't want to set local tax rates. We've put a bunch of new money into public education. We bought down the school property tax $5 billion, in addition to putting 6.2 of new money, I'll talk about in a minute, into public ed. So what were some other things we could do? Well, one, we don't deal with the appraisals, but we do hear a lot of complaints when people say, look, I appealed my appraisal last year, and I was able to get it down to this, maybe even went to court to do that on a commercial property. And then, Phil, they turned around, I get so many calls about this, they turned around the very next year when it came out, they appraised it at the same level or even more. Well, we made a little bit of a change in that. We changed the burden of proof, the standard that the appraisal districts have to reach to raise it back up. So let's say that Toby takes his business, challenges the valuation, and he's able to knock it down from $500,000 to $400,000. And then they come back and they appraise it the next year and they take it up to $550,000. The appraisal districts will no longer be able to do that just whimsically, which is basically the way they can do it now. Now they have to have clear and convincing evidence to support that. And under the law, clear and convincing evidence, I mean, it's just like, it's the highest standard, the highest burden of evidence that anybody has in a courtroom. So I think effectively what you've done, since we usually do 2-year evaluations around here, I think if you appeal your tax, your appraisal rather, if you go appeal that, then I think if 2 years later they were going to raise it back up, it's going to be very difficult for them to do that unless they've got clear and convincing evidence that's justified. So probably you're going to hold that rate now for 4 years, which is a nice deal. So also, don't ever let them talk you into going to annual appraisals. That's a really bad idea. You want to do appraisals every 2 years. Otherwise, you go through this every year, and it exponentially increases the rate that your properties increase. Another thing we looked at is what can we do is we wanted to try to make the process more transparent. And nobody's trying to hide anything, but it's a very complex system at the property tax and appraisal level. So we looked around, and there was a study done a couple of years ago on the 5 largest counties in Texas. And in those 5 largest counties, in 2017, 800,000 people appealed their property tax appraisal. 800,000 people in those 500 counties, in those 5 counties. But you know how many people turned up at the tax rate hearing for their county commissioners or their city councils or their school boards out of those 5 counties? 800,000 people appealed their appraisals. But your tax that you pay is based on the rate that the taxing entity sets applied to the appraisal, right? So the tax rate hearings are very important. You know how many people showed up at those hearings, which are posted and made public by your taxing entities? 30. 30 out of 5 counties. So obviously there's some communication issues there. People don't realize that opportunity is available to them. So Deborah, what we did, and we talked about this at lunch, we took, and there's some things about it in some of these handouts, but it'll take a year or so for the websites to get developed. But there will be a website that you'll be able to go to. And you'll be able to type in, Kirk Martin can type in his and Angie's address. And have you seen the mansion they live in? I mean, it's like, you know what justices of the peace make and everything. But they'll be able to type in the address at their Ponderosa, and it'll pull up on the screen. And on that screen, it will tell them what the no new tax rate would be. Because what happens, they don't have to, an entity doesn't even have to raise your tax rate. If your appraisals have gone up, you're going to pay more taxes, right? More property taxes. And so we've put in there what the no new revenue tax rate would be. So you can look and see that if your appraisal went up, what the tax rate would be to establish to create a no new revenue rate for you or for your district. You'll also be able to look at what the proposed tax rate is by that taxing entity. You'll be able to look, it'll give you other information relative to the taxes on your property. It'll even show you how each member of that council or commissioner's court has voted for that tax rate. And then it'll also show you when and where the tax rate final hearing will be so that you can go to it. And it'll be that for every taxing entity. You'll be able to click on the icon of Weatherford ISD, of ESD number 2, of Weatherford College, whatever. And in fact, we've arranged for Brent Baker's face to be right on that icon with Weatherford College, just to help draw people to it. So, but the idea was, if 800,000 people are appealing and only 30 people are showing up, if you want to complain about your property taxes, I mean, to be honest, you need to get involved in the process. If you want to complain, I know Pat Dean is happy to talk to you anytime about the need, about the county budget and where it's at and why they need what they need. But if you want to complain about it, and if I want to complain about it, then we need to show up and be a part of that process. And so we need more than 30 people to show up at those tax rate and other hearings where they're taking public input on the budget. I know Kevin with City of Weatherford, y'all want that as well. You want people to come there and give their input. So a couple other little things. One thing that's really good for Parker County, a lot of people, is anybody sitting on property that they've got under what they call ag exempt? Okay, a lot of people in here are. And that's really not the right technical term. It's really open space, because true ag exempt is where you're living off the land. It's a different deal. It's in the Constitution. But most of us in Parker County have what's called open space, an exemption, which lets you pay very low property taxes. The problem with that is if you change the use of that property, develop it, sell it to someone who's going to develop it, factored into that is going to be a 5-year clawback of property taxes at full value for those 5 years at 7% interest compounded over those 5 years, which adds another 40%. Well, the net effect of that is, and it really doesn't help the taxing entities that much because it's not money they can really plan on or budget in. It just kind of shows up. But the real net effect of it is it suppresses development of property. It delays property going to its highest and best use, which can have homes or businesses or whatever on it, generating income for you or for whoever owns it, and tax revenues to the local taxing entities. And the way it does that, so let's say that you've got a piece, and you know the common thing is you've got 50 acres that you bought 20 years ago to build a house on, or you've got 25 acres that you inherited from your parents, or you've got 10 acres that you moved onto, and now all of a sudden it's at the intersection of the new Rick Williamson or whatever, and it's worth, let's say it's worth $1 million. Well, if you go to change the use of that, because it's over $400,000, you're going to pay 24%, what is it, Wayne, in capital gains taxes. And then on top of that, you're going to have to pay on the full $1 million, or on whatever your gain is out of it, you're going to have to pay that 5-year clawback at 7% compounded interest. And so you look at it and you go, wow, that $1 million piece of property, I'm only going to net $500,000 out of it. So what do? You say, well, I'm just going to wait a while. And you let it sit for another 5 or 10 years before it's developed. And if somebody's going to buy that property from you to develop it, they're factoring all that in, that clawback, into the sales price too. So it ends up ultimately getting paid by you, the owner of the property. So what we did with that, I filed a bill, and I thought it was going to get there, and it got close, to just completely abolish that. And I'm actually convinced it would have generated more tax dollars and certainly a tremendous amount of economic development had we done that. We kind of ended up with a compromise, and we ended up with, instead of it being 5-year clawback, it'll now be 3. And instead of it being 7% compounded interest, it'll now be 5%. And so at least we got it going in the right direction, and I'm confident in a few years we can go back and take it a little bit further. So those are some of the things we did on the property tax. There's a lot of other nuances in that I think are kind of going to be neat going forward, but those are kind of the big things. Public school finance. Public schools are the largest budget item for the state, although Medicaid, which is a federal program that we have zero control over, they just tell us how much to write a check for. And it's really frustrating because as much as we need something like that, the way it's designed today, it provides a very poor quality of health care. And in fact, studies out there sometimes show that people are better off just going to the emergency room than trying to go through Medicaid. And it's tremendously fraud-ridden, and it just has a lot of problems with it. In fact, we've been begging the feds to just let us take it over in Texas. We think we could actually maybe buy private insurance, buy Blue Cross or whatever, cheaper than the money that's being spent in Medicaid, and come out with better outcomes. Plus, we're happening to be in a cookie-cutter Medicaid model and the healthcare demographics for Texas aren't the same as Maine or Washington or wherever. We think we can just do a better job, but so far they haven't let us do that, which is kind of frustrating, but we're pushing hard for that. But anyway, so Medicaid, very soon, the way it's going, is going to overtake what we're spending on public education, which is really tragic. But it's our largest funding piece today. And so what we did, we added, as I said, we share that cost with the local districts. And so we put, as I mentioned, $11.2 billion of new money, which the state's whole part of our budget, the state taking out the federal funds, is about $120 billion. So adding $11.2 billion in was a really, really huge step. But we put $6 billion of that, $5 billion went to property tax buy down, the other $6.2 basically went, $2 billion of it went to teacher and other school employee compensation. And then we put the other $4 billion pretty much into early childhood education up to the 3rd grade. Because really what we're told is if they aren't reading at grade level by the 3rd grade, you've really probably lost them. And so it's really geared toward that. It also kind of shifted the funding formula a little bit away from being a per capita formula that was based on how the child in the classroom, how many seats are in the classroom, to being more that's based on the child's needs. I think we were able to start that kind of transition. I think that's something the whole education community will be excited about as that grows in going forward. Teacher retirement system. One of the largest liabilities that the state has is something like a $40 billion liability to taxpayers. Teacher retirement system is one of the largest retirement defined benefit programs in the world. 28 million Texans, and we're going to 1,000 people a day. 28 million Texans, and 1 in 20 people are members of the teacher retirement system. They or someone in their husband, wife, whatever. In fact, how many people in here today are members of the teacher retirement system? Raise your hands. Okay, there aren't as many here. This is a small business group, so it's a little bit different demographic. But 1 in 20 Texans are a member of that. Well, it had become actuarially unsound, which meant that it was a tremendous risk to all of us to have to pay for it. And so we took $670 million and infused that into the teacher retirement system and brought it back again up to where it's actuarially sound. And to prevent that from happening in the future, the state increased, just like most employers, they put part of the money into the 401 for their employees, or the city of Weatherford pays into the Texas Municipal Retirement System, part for their employees do the rest of it. The state pays into the teacher retirement system. And to avoid this happening again in the future, we increased, going forward, the state's contribution to teacher retirement by 29%. So we hope that is shored up for a long time to come, because a lot of people are relying on it, and you don't want to have to pay it if it goes under. So let me see. We're also on schools, just a couple quick other things. We did do some reform in STAR testing. If it's my world, we would not have any high-stakes testing, but it's just so churned in at the federal and state level and really turned into kind of a bureaucratic level. It's very hard to pull away from. I'd much rather trust Susan and her team to decide with parents and teachers what the right testing models are to gauge kids. And parents are really good about knowing if schools are doing a good job too. But we had that. We were able to whittle back a little bit the number of tests they take, and we also gave more flexibility so that they all don't have to be given during the same time, the same week, which puts so much pressure on the kids, so they can kind of be spread out through the semesters. Susan, I'm leaving out a couple of things. You think of anything else? I'm winging it here now. That's pretty good. Okay. School safety. We did put a lot of money into school safety this time. It is a huge priority for the state. There's really kind of 3 parts to that. One part is hardening the targets. A lot of our schools were not built with security in mind. Some of them are 50-year-old buildings, and the security needs are completely different between Aledo, Mejia, and downtown Dallas. And newer schools, a lot of them did take security into account, but not to the extent that we all really know they need to be today. So hardening those targets, entries, exits, windows, protocols, outside structures, how close you can park, all of that's a piece of it. Another part of it is boots on the ground. And that can be having a police department like Aledo does for their school district. It can be having other law enforcement agencies providing people. Can be private security, although this is a little bit confusing on how you can use private security. Training your teachers. A lot of school districts are moving to the state's Marshall program or something like that, where they go through training to be armed in the building, and they're trained and repeatedly trained with update in-service training to deal with active shooters. And that's turning out to be a very, very popular program and growing. The third element of it, boots on the ground, hardening the targets. The third element is really threat assessment. And that gets a lot into identifying kids and others that could pose a risk to the school. And a lot of it's common sense, that if someone's wearing a trench coat every day for the last few days and coming into the building, they need to be stopped. But a lot of it's a lot more subtle things of looking for signs of mental health. We put a lot of money into providing training and assistance for mental health assessments, not trying to turn our schools, we got a lot of concern from folks that they thought we were going to be doing psychological assessments and tagging kids with certain things, and that's not at all what it's about. It actually goes back to Columbine. After Columbine, well, the Secret Service has always done threat assessments for government officials, and they're the best in the country at that. After Columbine, they were asked to come in and help develop a threat assessment model identifying mental health and other threat issues for schools, and they did that. And now there's a lot of programs like that out there. What we found is most school districts weren't aware of those different tools that were out there and others. And so we put it was HB 10, SB 10, and it was a very controversial bill because I think a lot of people misunderstood it. But think of it a lot like your school nurse that you had when we grew up. That school nurse sometimes might see a child and call them into the classroom because they saw something that was a concern, or a teacher might say, hey, would you visit with this child? I'm concerned. And if the nurse found a concern, they would then contact the family and try to, usually the family would then go to the physician, take care of them themselves. Otherwise, the family would, if there wasn't a family, that the nurse would then try to help them get health care assistance from some other source. This is basically the same thing. You're going to have people in the schools that are given additional training on identifying mental health risks, and if they identify them, they're going to give it that family very quietly and very privately, and those families will usually take care of that themselves and get their child the help they need. If there's not help there, then they'll try to make other help available to them, but it's always going to be centered around the family, not centered around the school, centered around the guardians, not centered around the school. So school safety was a big deal, and there's a lot of new tech coming in that's really exciting in that arena. So, you know, it's just the difficult world we live in right now. A couple other quick things. I will say one other thing, then maybe we've got time for a question, maybe we don't. But just one other quick thing. It's probably scary to say, wow, you spent all this money, now we got to pay for it. I want you to know that we were able to put that $11 billion into public ed, which included buying down those property taxes. We were able to fully fund the state budgets, highways, everything going forward that we normally have to do. We were able to repair the teacher retirement system. We were able to do that and only increase our budget over the budget 2 years ago, when you factor in inflation and population growth, by 1.5%. And in fact, even if you don't factor in population growth and inflation, we are only 4% above the budget we had 4 years ago in real dollars. So, and by the way, we also left $12 billion, which is about 10%, in the state reserve fund in case we have Hurricane Harvey again. And by the way, in addition to all that, we had to put almost $4 billion of new money into Hurricane Harvey remediation repairs. And so all of that we're able to do and hold that budget down very, very well. So it was a really good fiscal year for the state, and hopefully a great fiscal year for schools, and hopefully y'all will really begin to see some assistance on the property tax side too. We do have about 5 minutes. We're happy to answer a question on anything, because anything at all? Anybody? Yeah. Oh, hi, Deborah.
So how did you, do you expect Bonham to be back in his role?
Okay, Dennis Bonham is our Speaker of the House. Joe Strauss had been the Speaker for the last 10 years. A lot of us had some disagreements with Speaker Strauss. Very nice guy, but we just had some real policy differences and leadership differences. I actually filed against him to run in this last time, and ultimately there were about 5 of us that entered in the race. Dennis Bonham became Speaker. Dennis is a good guy and a good friend, and he, I think, did an outstanding job. He has tremendous administrative and leadership skills, and I think the reason that we were able to do some of the things we've talked about today were because Dennis did a good job. And so I think the Speaker of the House is the most difficult job in the state as far as the statewide officials, because he's always only one vote away from being removed from office, because we can do that at any time. and because you have to keep this balance between, I mean, there's 83 Republican, well, there's 76 as a majority out of the 150 in the Texas House. We only have 83 Republicans. And so it is constantly a delicate balance between the R's and the D's, the liberals and the conservatives, the libertarians and the far, far crazy left people, and which we have more and more of, and urban, suburban, rural. It is a tough thing to constantly balance, and he did a good job of doing that. And so, so I want to compliment him on that. And so yes, I think he'll be back for speaker next time.
Do we have any other questions for
Yes.
Representative King? I would like to thank you, Representative King, for helping the chamber with our amendments for SB 29.
The lobbying
That
or
was
the,
where
I never remember the numbers.
Municipalities and school districts can't be members of a chamber.
Oh, yeah. So what that was real quick, so some of the larger cities and counties are spending a lot of money hiring government affairs professionals, lobbyists, to come down and work their issues. And there's a lot of issues about whether taxpayer dollars should be spent to do that. The other side of it is, and there was a bill that almost passed and did finally pass in one form, to abolish that. The problem was, if you abolish that, the big cities and big counties would still be able to do it just by hiring internal staff to do that. They would just hire those same people they contracted with internally because they got a lot of money to do that with. It would have completely, if we had done that, then Parker County and all our smaller and suburban rural counties and cities would have just been completely overwhelmed because we're constantly competing for transportation dollars and other things. For me, I'm all you got on the floor for Parker County and for Wise County. They've got 15 state reps in Tarrant County. Houston has 24 state reps. So we're constantly competing for those. And the way the bill was written, it would have prevented the chamber from even being coming and talking to me about legislation because they're a member of the Texas Association of Business, and that group hires governmental affairs people. It would have prevented the city of Weatherford from being a member of your chamber. It was just a really bad bill. And so we were able to do what really needed to be done, was just put disclosure in there. And so what it says now, if a government entity's hiring professional lobbyists to come down and work, sometimes against the taxpayer's interest, then that has to be disclosed as a line item in their budget, who they hired, how much they paid them, and what they hired them to work on. And then let those local voters make the decision of whether that's really what they want Houston to do. So that's what that was about. But it was a real mess because it was going to prevent the city of Weatherford, the city of Aledo from being a member of the chamber. It was going to prevent the chamber from coming down and visiting with us if you stayed a member of TAB. It would have prevented your county tax assessor collector, who's required by statute to get training from their professional association. They couldn't have been a member of that professional association because it has governmental affairs people that report back to them what's going on in Austin. It is just a big mess. So thank you, but it was a good cause.
Thank you. And thank you, Representative King.
Thank you. You might go down there. Thanks.
Thank you so much.